And all right, so good evening. So let us discuss about nationality, statelessness, and refugees. Okay, under public international law. All right, so let's discuss first about the concept of nationality. So according to, of course, Justice Cruz, okay, according to Justice Cruz, nationality is membership in a political community with all its concomitant rights and obligations. So it is the tie that binds an individual to his state from which he can claim protection and whose laws he is obliged to obey. Okay, so how are we going to differentiate it from the concept of citizenship? I think the concept of citizenship we have discussed this thoroughly on in constitutional law, but of course, when as discussed in constitutional law, you'll distinguish nationality from citizenship in a way that, while citizenship is something which is personal and more or less a permanent membership in a political community. So the term citizen is derived from the Latin word cives and came from Roman law. So in the larger and more popular sense, the term denotes one who was a member of the body politic of the state, owes allegiance to, and may claim reciprocal protection from the government. So this is cited in the book of Dean Magsalin. But I think he cited here provisions, or he cited here, I think, yung Texon versus Comelec, or if you can recall, that's the FPJ case. Okay, then citizenship, according to Justice Cruz, has a more exclusive meaning, that it applies only to certain members of the state according or accorded more privileges than the rest of the people who owe it allegiance. Its significance is municipal and not international. Well, on the other hand, nationality is a membership in any political community, whether monarchical, democratic, or autocratic. It does not necessarily carry with it the exercise of political rights. So, simply put, while nationality is membership in an ethnic, social, racial, and cultural group, citizenship is membership in a political society. So that's the definition, or that's the impression of Justice Edgardo Paras. Okay, now, all right. So what's the importance of determining nationality in international law? So, an individual ordinarily can participate in international relations only through the instrumentality of the state to which he belongs, as when his government asserts a claim on its behalf for injuries suffered by him in a foreign jurisdiction. So, this remedy would not be available to a stateless individual who would have no entity with in the entity with international personality to intercede for him under the law of nations. Okay, then how is nationality acquired? So I think you may have, as in the previous slide would show, of course, we have this distinction between nationality and citizenship. Acquisition is more or less similar or synonymous to what happens in citizenship. So how is nationality acquired? So nationality may be acquired by birth or by naturalization. When we speak by birth, it depends on what is being followed by the state. So for example, by birth, there's these two concepts. So one concept would be your jus soli or jus loci. So what is jus soli or jus loci? So an individual acquires the nationality of the state where he is born, or the determination of the citizenship or nationality will be by location or by the situs of which the person was given birth to. Okay, kung saan siya pinanganak. All right, then you have to contrast this with the other mode of acquisition, which is jus sanguinis. So jus sanguinis is nationality of an individual's parents regardless of the place of its birth. So jus sanguinis, it's citizenship by blood. Okay, by blood. Now, of course, the other mode of acquisition would be naturalization. So what is naturalization? Naturalization is a process by which a foreigner acquires voluntarily or by operation of law the nationality of another state. right? So now, what are the types of naturalization? So we have direct naturalization and derivative naturalization. So when we speak of direct naturalization, this involves in individual proceedings under general naturalization laws, which may be judicial or administrative in character. So if example, here in the Philippines, we have several laws which may be administrative or judicial in character. So we have, I think, Commonwealth Act 625, Commonwealth Act 63, Republic Act 9139. These are, if you can recall, these laws, as you may have discussed in Constitutional Law 1, okay, as may be discussed in Constitutional Law 1, it's that's the no, that's the laws which provide for procedure as to direct naturalization. Okay, of course, it may be made into individual proceedings, a special act of the legislature, often in favor to distinguish foreigners, then collective change of nationality, or in some cases the adoption of orphan minors as nationals of the state where they are born. So isa-isa natin. So individual proceedings, yung sinabi kong mga laws. Then we speak of special act of the legislature. We have this concept of acquisition of citizenship by way of act of Congress. So what would be a good example of that? Of course, if you are watching sports, usually the international sports bodies now allow for naturalized citizens other than that of blood, in order to be able to qualify playing for the national team. So 'di ba, naalala nyo sa Gilas Pilipinas, we naturalized Marcus Duthit, we naturalized Andre Blatch. Currently, our naturalized player is Justin Brownlee. So this they became citizens by virtue of an act of Congress. They were declared as citizens for all intents and purposes in order to participate in sports. Aside from sports, of course, these are the ones that are visible right now that you can see as an example. If you can recall the most of our Chinese taipans and other foreign taipans here in the Philippines, if you're going to go back to their history, they were granted citizenship by direct act. But of course, since this was at the time of martial law, the president has the legislative power through presidential decree. So officially, you can consider that as a direct act of quote unquote Congress, in which here is the president exercising legislative powers through presidential decrees. So of course the medium is different, but the concept and idea is the same. The citizenship was granted by way of a decree. Okay, then collective change of nationality. If you can recall the discussions in Texon versus Comelec, remember that Spain ceded the Philippines to the US, and since there is a change of regime from Spanish to American or United States, the sovereignty is changed from Spain to the United States. The nationalities of the Filipinos who live or sojourn in the Philippines, they were given naturalization. They were given en masse naturalization upon the change of that regime. So if you can recall, of course, this was heavily discussed in Texon versus Comelec. Of course, after the ratification of the Treaty of Paris, that is when the count was made. Okay, and I think in several books, be it in Bernas and be it in my constitutional law book, there was an explanation as to how en masse naturalization happened during that time. So that was the reason why the grandfather of Fernando Po in Texon versus Comelec was considered Filipino by the Supreme Court for all intents and purposes. They explained the nuance of the collective change of nationality at the time during the transition from Spanish to American regime. Okay, then in some cases, adoption of orphan minors. If you can recall, we have two kinds of adoption here in the Philippines. We have the domestic adoption. Of course, this involves local adoption. The other one is intercountry adoption. So for purposes of having an intercountry adoption, we have a specific law for intercountry adoption, which that would be the Intercountry Adoption Act. And that law provides for an intercountry adoption board. So it would determine the qualification. So of course, it would screen or determine possible foreign adopters, because of course they have to screen it, because if you're going to just make light, or you are lax on screening, instead of having the intention of the children, because the purpose of your intercountry adoption is to give a better future to the child, but what if the one that you're going to be given, the adapter will be, of course, later on it was found that he was not really fit, diba? So there is this process in your Intercountry Adoption Act. All right, then derivative naturalization. So usually nangyari dito kasi hindi derivative dito sa Pilipinas pero makikita mo to sa ibang bansa, like for example United States. So for example, if you married an American, I think there's still a law there that what will happen is you're going to carry the citizenship of your spouse. Or for example, so on the minor parent of the natural parent or the alien woman upon marriage to a national. Also, there are other examples, like for example, if you join a foreign army. So practically, if you join a foreign army, you're going to divest your original citizenship. Then you're going to, aside from divesting, of course, you're going to take the citizenship of the one what armed forces did you join. Okay. All right. So multiple nationalities. So, but notwithstanding our discussion, is multiple nationality prevalent, or is it permissible? So the possession of an individual of more than one nationality is the definition of multiple nationality. So this is acquired as a result of the concurrent application to him of the conflicting municipal laws of two or more states, claiming him as their natural. So what would be the example? So these are examples provided by Justice Cruz. So of course, a child born in the United States of Filipino parents would be an American national under the jus soli, and a Filipino national under jus sanguinis. Then a woman marrying a foreigner may retain her own nationality under the laws of her state, while also acquiring the nationality of her husband under the laws of his state. Then under the doctrine of indelible allegiance, an individual may be compelled to retain his original nationality, notwithstanding that he has already renounced it under the laws of another state whose nationality was acquired. Then a state may allow any of its nationals to remain as such, even if they may have acquired another nationality, as where he is conferred an honorary citizenship by a foreign government. Okay. All right. So of course, when we speak of dual nationality, we turn into this concept of dual citizenship. So if you can recall the case of Mercado versus Manzano, this is a jurisprudence which has a detailed discussion what is dual citizenship. Okay, so a dual citizenship would arise when a person whose parents are citizens of a state which adheres to the principle of jus sanguinis is born in a state which follows the doctrine of jus soli. Such a person, ipso facto and without any voluntary act on his part, is concurrently considered a citizen of both states. So considering the clause of the 1987 Constitution, it is possible for the following classes of citizens of the Philippines to possess dual citizenship. So one, so those who are born of Filipino fathers or mothers in foreign countries which follow the principle of jus soli. Then those born in the Philippines of Filipino mothers who and alien fathers if by the laws of their father's country such children are citizens of that country. Then the other one would be those who marry citizens if by laws of if the laws of the latter's country the former are considered citizens unless by their act or omission they may have deemed to have renounced Philippine citizenship. So there may be other situations in which a citizen of the Philippines may or without performing any act be also a citizen of another state. But the above cases are clearly possible given the constitutional provisions on citizenship. Okay? So I'll just pause for a few moments. And okay, all right. So let's go. Let's proceed. Okay. Uh, so now, of course, there is now an issue. So questions as to the nationality of an individual. Okay. So if there would be questions as to the nationality of an individual, any question as to whether a person possesses the nationality of a particular state shall be determined in accordance with the law of that state. So in other words, it is for each state to determine under its laws who are its nationals. These laws shall be recognized by other states as long as they are consistent with international conventions, international customs, and principles of law generally recognized with regard to nationality. So this is one indicated in the Hague Convention of 1930 on the conflict of nationality laws. But well, despite of this, of course, later on we're going to discuss that there is this possibility that there is still this concept of you know uh state this concept of statelessness. So even if these are, of course, these are the factors. Of course, if you're going to consider the nationality with respect to the law, there might be instances or crossovers of these rules that would tend to have a result that a person might be stateless. So what we're going to discuss statelessness later on. Okay, all right. So then we discussed the concept of effective nationality. So let us say that let's say that you have an original citizenship. Of course, we can consider the fact that you may be a dual citizen. But later on you went to another state which is of course foreign, or you're an alien to that citizenship. Now, there might be questions as to whether or not what particular law would apply to that person. Okay, in case of these situations, there is this concept of effective nationality. So this was discussed in the this concept of effective nationality is explained particularly in the Notebom case. So the Notebom case is an international decision. Okay, I think this involves a German national who has multiple nationalities. Then he had this problem somewhere in Guatemala, if I can recall it correctly, which he also, I think, claims also being a citizen. Okay, so of course in the decision, or the international tribunal decision here, of course it was, so it coined the concept of effective nationality. So what does it mean? So within a state, a person having more than one nationality shall be treated as if he had only one. Okay, so under this principle of effective nationality, the third state shall recognize conclusively in its territory either the nationality of the country of which he was habitually and principally present, or the nationality of the country with which he appears to be in fact most closely related. So I think in the Nottebohm case, it was determined that Nottebohm is more closely related to Germany, if I can recall it correctly. So that's why the German nationality laws were applied in this case, if I can recall it correctly. Okay. Then one case that is, of course, this is cited by Justice Cruz. We have U.S. versus Austria. Okay, so here it was held that citizenship is determined by rules prescribed by municipal law. Okay, so under the law of Austria, okay, to which the claimant had voluntarily subjected himself, he was an Austrian citizen. So the Austrian and Austro-Hungarian authorities were well within their rights in dealing with him as such. So possessing as he did dual nationality, he voluntarily took the risk incident to residing in Austrian territory and subjecting himself to the duties of obligations of an Austrian citizen arising under the municipal laws of Austria. Okay. Now we now go to this concept of statelessness. So what is this concept of statelessness? So this is the condition or status of an individual who is born without any nationality or who loses his nationality without retaining or acquiring another. Okay, so for example, a person born in a state where only jus sanguinis is recognized to parents whose state serves only the jus soli principle. The second case may be illustrated by an individual, okay, who after renouncing his original nationality in order to be naturalized in another state is subsequently denaturalized and thereafter denied repatriation by his former country. So what would be the consequence of statelessness? From the traditional viewpoint, the stateless individual is powerless to assert any right that otherwise would be available to him under international law, were he a national of a particular state. So any wrong suffered by him through the act of omission of a state would be damage without injury or damnum absque injuria, for in theory, no state was being offended and no international delict was committed. Okay. Then, of course, what would be the rights and recourse of stateless persons? So, we have this covenant relative to the status of stateless persons, which was, I think, signed in 1954. So, here the stateless person is entitled to, among others, the right to religion and religious instruction, access to courts, elementary education, public relief and assistance, rationing of products in short supply, and treatment no less favorable than that accorded aliens in general. Moreover, the terms of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are sufficiently broad to encompass the stateless person with its protection and sympathy as a member of a human family. Okay? But this being said, of course, I think the international community would want as much as possible to have an avoidance of a situation where a person would be stateless because let's say even in practical purposes, for example, deporting someone from the Philippines to another country. If you can recall, and I think we have discussed this before we might be discussing this in deportation. If you can recall the case of Majop versus Director of Prisons, technically in that case, Majop is already stateless. Well, because of things that happened during World War II, Majop was a bit overstaying now here in the Philippines. And when there was already a process for deporting him, it was determined that he was stateless. Okay, he is a stateless person. Under normal circumstances right now, for example, if let's say our immigration is strict, they held up a person, they want him to be deported because there is a lack of papers or any kind of reason. Usually the protocol there is he has to go back to his country of origin, because of course that's where his citizenship, di ba, effective nationality, di ba? But there would be an issue if that person is stateless, because If a person is stateless, where are you going where are you going to deport him? But usually I think under protocols, under immigration protocols, what happens is he's going to be returned to the place where he came from. So for example, if he came from, let's say, United States, but he was determined to be stateless. The last place where he was, where he sojourned from to the where he sojourned before he going to the Philippines, let us say, is the one that is the place where they're going to deport him back. Okay, I think that's the protocol there. Okay, so all right, so but here, as much as possible, the states would try to avoid statelessness. So under the Hague Convention of 1930, it adopted certain measures to avoid the condition of statelessness and all its attendant inconveniences. So what are these rules? So loss of nationality of by an individual is conditioned upon his retention or acquisition of another nationality, whether such loss be expatriation, naturalization as to the wife and children, or adoption. Then, in the case of naturalization, his wife and the minor children retain their existing nationality if they are not also naturalized. Moreover, the wife will acquire her husband's nationality if permitted, only with her consent. Okay, then the adopted child's nationality is also not lost if he does not acquire the adopter's nationality. And in other cases, children shall have the nationality of the state of their birth, whether their parents are either unknown, stateless or unknown nationality, or a father who is stateless of unknown nationality, and a mother who is a national of a state where they are born. Okay. Then we now go to refugees. Okay. So refugees. So what is the definition of the refugee? So under the Refugee Convention, okay, a refugee is someone who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of their nationality and is unable or owing to such fear is unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his or her or their formal habitual residence, is unable or owing to such fear is unwilling to return to it. So just to keep it a bit simple, a refugee is someone who left his country of origin because there are certain factors and compelling reasons, like persecution. There might be a genocide. There might be war. Okay, because of war, there would be displacement of persons in a particular territory. Okay, uh, if you see the war in Ukraine, the war going on right now, I think you might have seen that would be, of course, it's a result of the war. There would be refugees, and mostly I see most of them are Ukrainian, because they're trying to flee. They're trying to flee where there would be bombing, or where the war would be at its heart. Okay, if you can recall, I don't. Of course, some of you won't recall, because I would assume most of you are not even born yet. But if you can, if you remember history, diba, during the time of the Vietnam War and even post Vietnam War, a lot of Vietnamese do not want to do not want to stay in Vietnam after Saigon fell, 'di ba? That is why, if you can recall, 'di ba, yung last day na America, there are a lot of documentaries on that. Yung last day ng Vietnam, lahat ng mga kasya doon sa helicopter, nagsiksikan sila doon, 'di ba, para makatakas. Some of them, some of them who cannot escape, they used boats or modified boats. They sailed away. Some of them some of them some of them napadpad dito sa Pilipinas. So for a time, we have both people here, Vietnamese. I think most of the boat people are staying in Bataan at the time, there was this merong refugee facility doon sa Bataan eh. Then if I can recall, I was still young then, parang I think elementary pa yata ako nung grade 1. Meron yung malapit sa sa Merville, doon sa parang isang NHA housing site. May mga groups of boarding houses doon, puro mga Vietnamese boat people din yun nandun. I think if I can recall, the reason why I think later on they were repatriated na nung mga 1990 sila na repatriate, if I can recall it correctly. So yun, so we have this share of experience with refugees, 'di ba? Ang recent na kumalat ng mga refugees aside from Ukrainians, if you can recall, yung sa Afghanistan, 'di ba? 'Di ba nung bumalik yung mga Taliban, may mga iba sumakay doon sa plane, if you can recall, 'di ba, may mga iba akala nila parang jeep, sinabitan nila yung parang in a desperate move, sinabitan nila yung helicopter, baka makaabot silang sumasabit doon literally, 'di ba? Pero of course, I know that sadly some of them fell into their deaths, 'di ba? Yun yung nangyari. Kasi of course, some of them are desperate. They do not want to be part of the Taliban regime or for some reason, okay? Of course, for some reason, they do not want to do it, okay? So yun yung mga examples, mga recent memories natin of having experienced this concept of having refugees, okay? All right. So then, of course, what is the basis of your core principle? Okay, the core principle is the principle of non-refuma. Okay, that's the pronunciation there. It's non-refuma. Okay, so what is the concept? What is the principle of non-refuma? A refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. Okay, now what would be the rights of refugees? Of course, number one would be the right to refuma. Okay, then we have also the rights as provided for in the Refugee Convention. So it includes the right not to be expelled except under certain strictly defined conditions, the right not to be punished for any irregular duty into the territory of a contracting state, the right to non-discrimination, the right to decent work, the right to housing, land and property, which includes intellectual property, the right to education, the right to freedom of religion, the right to access to justice, the right to freedom of movement within the territory, the right to be issued civil identity and travel documents, and the right to social protection. Okay. Of course, if we have rights of refugees, what would be the obligations of refugees? Of course, refugees for their part, they are required to abide by the laws and regulations of the country of asylum and respect measures taken for the maintenance of public order. Okay. Then there would be instances for exclusion from refugee protection. So the refugee protection only protects persons who meet the criteria for refugee status. Certain categories of people are considered not to deserve refugee protection and should be excluded from such protection. So this includes persons for whom there are serious reasons to suspect that they may have committed a crime against peace, a war crime, or a crime against humanity. They have committed a serious non-political crime outside their country or refuge prior to the admission to that country as a refugee, or they are guilty of acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Okay. Now, with respect to the Philippines, we already have the Supreme Court has, I think, as recent as of this date, I think around mga 2 or 3 years ago, they issued rules of procedure for refugee status determination. Okay, the DOJ also has its mechanisms, which we now go to the case of Sabir versus DOJ RSPPU. Okay, so in this case, I think there was this Sabir is applying for refugee status, but of course, when he applied, there was a denial of his application. So he went up to the Supreme Court. So in this case, there was this discussion on the guidelines for refugee status determination proceedings. So yung refugee status determination proceedings, meron yan sa Refugee Convention. But in order to make it more understand we be able to understand it here in the Philippine setting. The Supreme Court provided for guidelines for refugee status determination proceedings. So here the Supreme Court determined through these guidelines. Okay, the first one would be is to discharge the shared and collaborative burden between the applicant and the protection officer. And to this end, the applicant must provide accurate, full, and credible counter proof in support of his or his claim and submit all relevant evidence reasonably available. And the protection officer, because the refugee would apply to the DOJ, there he would be given an interview or be examined by a protection officer. Okay, so the first one is the obligation or the applicant should provide for all of the relevant indication. So in the same vein, the protection officer must assist and aid the applicant in explaining, clarifying, and elucidating his or her claim. Okay, then notwithstanding the protection officer's shared burden, it is also the duty of the protection officer to assess the credibility of statements of the applicant and the evidence of record. So even if someone would claim as a refugee, it is still the obligation or the duty of the protection officer to determine whether or not the applicant, the alien applicant, okay, or the applicant for being a refugee, okay, would be credible. He's saying the truth. He has to examine all the pieces of evidence that was provided for by the refugee applicant. Okay, then the facts as ascertained should be applied to a definition of a refugee under the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. So considering the subjective and objective elements of the phrase well-founded fear. Okay, so the protection officer to this end should determine if the applicant has established to a reasonable degree that he or she would have been persecuted had the applicant not left his or her country of origin or would be persecuted if the applicant returns thereto. So kailangan nila i-determine kung pababalikin nila yung applicant, would it be really be dangerous, 'di ba? Would it violate the core principle of non-refoulement if they're going to send him back to his country of origin? Kailangan i-determine it is now in this case the guidelines provide that the protection officer's role is very much important. The protection officer should pull all of the staff, should do its best to determine whether or not this refugee applicant would be qualified to be given refugee status. It doesn't necessarily mean that the refugee can just assert. He also has this requirement or has this initiative or is being required to present evidence to show that he is indeed deserving of being given refugee status. Okay, so I think this is the lecture on nationality, statelessness, and refugees. Okay,